most remembered Amiga games are put on trial and given a chance to prove their worth, once and for all. This is Judge and Jury. All rise, Judge Drokk presiding. In this courtroom we will examine the cult status and time-honoured legacy of some of the Amiga's most revered titles, and with the help of a jury of experts in their field, we'll offer a final verdict as to whether the legacy of the titles on trial are indeed justified. In court today are Hybris from Discovery Software and its pseudo-sequel, Battle Squadron, published by Enterprise in 1989. Upon its release, Hybris was said by many to be deserving of an arcade-quality label, which was bequeathed upon it by reviewers and games-playing public of the time. It is in itself a classic example of a vertically scrolling shoot-em-up, similar to Terra Cresta. Certain jaded reviewers of the time awarded modest overall scores, but consumers of the era were more impressed after being let down by dire shooters such as Gold Runner. Its sequel Battle Squadron took the best things about Hybris and improved the flavour. The SID fan-pleasing soundtrack and thundering crunchy sound effects, smooth detailed graphics and addictive but tough gameplay remained, but Battle Squadron was more expansive and far more ambitious. These were an inseparable pair of titles that left a positive impression in many players and a warm memory that lasts until now. But is that legacy justified? Are Hybris and Battle Squadron really the great games we remember them to be? Or do we simply hold them dear as we desperately craved a great shoot-em-up fix at the time? When stood-along titles such as the god-awful Gold Runner and Cyclops' dire Anarchy, did these games appear better than they actually were? Well, the jury shall decide. Now let's meet the defendants.
Hey everyone, I'm Mark Macrae, originally from London, England, now residing in Wellington, New Zealand. I'm a massive fan of anything Commodore 64, Amiga and arcade gaming related, and I'm also a contributing writer and editor for the ZZAP Amiga magazine from Fusion Retro. I'm also delighted to be discussing classic Amiga games on this channel, which I hold in such high regard.
Hey everybody, Bastish B here for the 64K YouTube channel. I'm originally from South Africa and now live in Canada, and I'm so glad to be finally making a series about classic Amiga gaming.
Hi, my name is David-Motowylak. I live in the United States and I've been a long-time Amiga fan since I purchased my first Amiga 500 back in 1988.
You may now present your evidence.
The Amiga was blessed with a lot of really fantastic arcade-style shoot-em-ups in its lifespan, but this double dose from Capcom in the late 80s really set the bar high quality-wise.
I purchased my Amiga 500 during the summer of 1988, and the first game I took home with me was Arkanoid by Discovery Software. For those that have played the game, you know it was a spot-on conversion of the Taito Ball and Paddle arcade classic. Unfortunately, Discovery only published a couple of titles, but I always kept my eyes open for anything that they put on the shelves. Hybris was released by Discovery a few months later by developers Capcom, and it definitely lived up to my expectations.
Hybris. Wow, I have such fond memories of this game. At the time this came out, I still had a Commodore 64, which was starting to wane a little bit at that time, around early 89, and the 16-bit machines were beginning to wind up. I remember going around a friend's house and just being wowed by some of the demos around at that time, showing off the capability of the Amiga. And there were two games in particular that caught my eye, Xenon and Hybris. I played both games tons that day, and Hybris in particular made me decide it was time to put an Amiga on my Christmas list.
Having originally played Hybris a few years after its release, I enjoyed it, but it was honestly quickly forgotten in the glut of early 90s shoot-em-ups I was playing at the time. Fast forward to now, having not played it in almost 3 decades, it was a pleasant surprise.
Battle Squadron, the spiritual successor, was released a year later in 1989, but on the Electric Zoo Enterprise label and not Discovery.
Battle Squadron is a game I've played a lot over the years, and it honestly never gets old. This pseudo-sequel always felt like the big 16-bit brother Hybris wanted to be, dialing everything up to the max.
While it wasn't based on an actual arcade game, it looked, sounded, and played like one.
When it loads up, the first thing that grabs your attention are the first few bars of the title music, which was very much like SID music, that memorable synth and deep bassy drum beat. Just such a great tune. For a 64 user, it was the first time I thought a 16-bit machine could actually produce sound worthy to classify as Succession. And if you remember the Atari ST sound, you'll know what I mean.
Smooth scrolling, fast action, and a rocking soundtrack. It was exactly what Amiga owners wanted.
The graphics are really well drawn drawn and colourful, although I didn't get the initial wow factor as I did with the bas relief graphics of Xenon.
And especially one to show off to our non-Amiga owning friends.
I found the scrolling and movement so smooth though, leading to a much faster game that I enjoyed way more than Xenon in the end.
Its early 80s arcade's roots shine through and is a great reminder of simplicity over complexity.
This is only marred slightly by the common effect back in the day where the sound effects would kind of share the same channel as the sound, so part of the sound would pause as you blast away, but still a great achievement from composer Paul van der Welk.
It wasn't available anywhere else and was far ahead of anything that was previously available.
The gameplay though is pure arcade, with a unique style of weapon upgrade which you use in conjunction with smart bombs to find the best strategy for each level. It's a great blaster, and I keep changing my mind on whether I like it better than its sequel Battle Squadron or not.
The tunes still absolutely rock with that wonderful Amiga synth drum sound pumping through the speakers and then some. The great sound effects complement the action.
After loading this back up for this review, the title music still grabs your attention, and if you have nostalgic memories of this game, the hairs will just stand up on the back of your neck when you hear it. I guess you could say the graphics are looking a bit dated slightly, but no more than any arcade shoot 'em up of that era.
The graphics do look a bit dated now, and the repetitive nature of the backgrounds do detract slightly, although reviews of the time did mention this.
And if you went to a modern arcade and you saw this in a cabinet, say next to Terra Crest or Slapfight or something, Hybris would stand up in its own right for sure.
While the game has similar qualities to Hybris, it does its own thing with a different power-up system, has a 2-player mode, and non-linear level play.
It was very well received back in 1989, and I can see why.
The graphics are great in this one, with detailed landscapes and just generally more modern looking than Hybris.
In terms of graphics, it is one of the best looking shooters on the platform. I especially love the enemies hidden under the cloaking devices. That still looks really awesome to me.
Graphically, its beautiful pixel art arcade look would not have looked out of place in any arcade of that era.
This one has a slightly wider playing area as it scrolls slightly left and right to give you more room for movement, and the scrolling is super smooth.
Living in the USA, I didn't realize at the time that the game was reformatted for the NTSC standard, and due to a smaller size playfield, the game is a lot tougher. Seek out the PAL original if you are emulating the game.
And the tunes are just fantastic. Pure rocking goodness and as catchy as hell.
The obvious enhancement with Battle Squadron is the 2-player cooperative mode, which is always great fun and quite unusual for a shooter, especially on the Amiga. The sound is awesome on this one too, although for me it's just not as memorable or distinctive as Hybris.
The game is still a challenge, easy to get into but hard to master, and that's still one of its best features for me.
It's really hard to knock either of these titles. They are widely thought as some of the best vertical shooting on the old Amiga.
For my money, Hybris' legacy is intact because it simply all comes down to gameplay in the end, and it still delivers in that department. In my opinion, a great throwback to that vintage arcade-style shooter.
So my verdict? A worthy shooter which still holds up today.
2 thumbs up for both in 2021.
Battle Squadron is probably the more polished shooter overall, with the improved graphics, bigger game and the 2-player mode, but Hybris has that little something extra. But I'd say Hybris is the more enjoyable game for me, and if I had a spare 15 minutes and didn't have a friend to join me, I'd always choose Hybris.
I give it the thumbs up in the legacy department, all the way.
And the verdict is justified. The court is now adjourned. All rise, and we'll see you again soon for the next case.